The search for the perfect web browser is a never-ending quest. It seems like every year I'm switching to a different web browser just because there's something about every web browser that's just not perfect for me. But while there is no perfect web browser, over the years I have compiled a list of my favorite and my least favorite web browsers that I've ever used. And in this video I'm going to be ranking these from base tier all the way down to spyware tier, so we can finally see once and for all which web browsers are the best to use, which one should you be using. And for this ranking, I'm going to be focusing on a few things. First off, the browser needs to be privacy respecting, so I don't want it phoning all of my data home to Google. I don't want it collecting a whole bunch of data about me. I just want to browse the web in peace. I want it to be fairly easy to use for normal people. I don't want to have to do a ton of configuration to set up my browser and have all of the websites that I use most often just completely break in the name of privacy. Yes, you can have a very private browser, but if it breaks the entire internet, then it's not really what I'm looking for. And finally, this is just going to be down to my opinion. So if I like the UI, if I like the web browser, then I'm going to rank it higher. So this is going to be a little bit subjective, but I'm going to try to be as objective as possible. But don't get too mad whenever I place your favorite web browser in the bottom tier. And so we have 5 different tiers right here. We have the spyware tier. I'm sure you can guess which browsers are going to go here. These are going to be the browsers that siphon all of your data to a private company. They're not open source, so you have no idea what they're doing in the background. And just generally software that you should really stay away from. It doesn't respect your privacy at all. We have the mediocre tier of browsers that I think are pretty bad, and I wouldn't really recommend anybody use them. We have the decent tier, which I think are browsers that are okay. They're not my favorite, but if you have some special connection to them, then go ahead and continue using them. Nothing wrong with that. Then we have the excellent tier, which is going to be browsers that are great. You can't really go wrong using these browsers. And finally, the base tier, of course, for the best of the best. But enough intro, let's get to the ranking. So let's start off with a controversial one, Brave. Now I actually think that Brave is pretty good, so I'm going to come right out of the gate and put this on excellent tier. So by default, Brave is going to be pretty secure and private. So out of the box is going to block a whole bunch of trackers. It blocks ads by default, which I think is a really good feature that more web browsers should have. It has a bunch of sensible privacy configurations that are already set. And there are a lot of options here, so you can go through and tweak it however you would like. And I used this browser for a long time personally. I used it probably for a year, and I didn't really have any big complaints about it. So it respects your privacy and has pretty good defaults. You could probably even convince one of your normie friends to use this. You could probably download this for your grandma. It would be a better choice than Google Chrome. But of course, we can't talk about Brave without getting into the controversial parts about it. And of course, I'm talking about the whole crypto aspect of it. And Brave heavily uses its own cryptocurrency called BAT as a feature throughout the browser. And if you opt in, Brave will send you ads in the form of push notifications. So every once in a while, maybe every 20 minutes or so, when you're using your browser, you'll get a little pop-up ad, usually for some crypto thing in the corner. And every time you view an ad, Brave gives you a little bit of their Brave Bucks or their BAT, the cryptocurrency. And so in theory, over a long time, you can accumulate some actual money doing this. Wow, you get paid to browse the internet. Sounds great. But there is the weird kind of ethical considerations. So you're blocking ads from creators. Maybe you're watching a YouTuber and you're blocking their ads. But instead of the YouTuber getting money from the ad, now Brave is getting the money because you're viewing their ads. And Brave has this system where you can kind of redistribute the wealth back to the creators if they are enrolled in their BAT program. But it's just a little bit weird ethically, so some people are against it because of that. Some people just really hate cryptocurrency, and they think that it's destroying the planet. So you will see some very polarized opinions on this browser. And if you don't care about the crypto at all, you can actually just basically turn it off completely. So you can disable everything. You can even disable this little icon here, this Brave Rewards thing. And I know on the front page, they'll even have some sponsored images from some advertisers, and you can turn that off. It's kind of annoying, but you can turn it off. There's a little show sponsored image box right here you can turn off. And to be honest, I used the BAT system for a while. I got their cryptocurrency. I probably got like, I don't know, 40 bucks of their fake imaginary internet money. But I stopped using it because I kind of thought it was pointless. I don't really care that much about their cryptocurrency, so you can just turn that off. But of course, if you want to throw any of your imaginary internet money at me, you can. Just throwing that out there. But I think that Brave is a good choice for a web browser, even if you don't care about the whole cryptocurrency thing. But if you do, then I guess that makes it even better. Next up, let's talk about Firefox. Okay, I might get a little bit of hate for this, but I am just putting vanilla Firefox in decent tier. I know tons of people love Firefox, but out of the box, I think the vanilla Firefox experience is actually very bad. So let's just actually see what I'm talking about. And I've done a whole other video ranting about Firefox. You can watch that if you want to, but I'm going to try not to rant too much here. But they just have a ton of useless, I guess, bloat, you would call it. A bunch of useless features that I never use. They have this Firefox view, which you have to disable. They have Pocket, which is a service that collects your personal information. Even though they claim to be a privacy browser, they have a bunch of analytics all over the browser. Like, I know in their add-ons page, they have Google Analytics running in the background, collecting information about you, and just a whole bunch of telemetry. I just really do not like the default out-of-the-box experience with Firefox. Every time I try to use this for normal use, I end up just disabling half of the web browser, it seems like. And it just takes me like a half hour to set it up every single time, just dealing with all the nuisances of Firefox. And that's why I don't really like it out of the box. It also defaults to Google as a default search engine, which I get that they get a lot of money from Google, but it's still a really baffling choice for a privacy-focused web browser. And so while, of course, I think this is better than a lot of alternatives like Google Chrome, I don't think that it's the best web browser to use. But you might be wondering why I have another version of Firefox down here. So this one, I would say, is Hardened Firefox. You might be wondering, what is that? Well, it's the same thing as Firefox, but with a custom user.js. And a user.js file is basically a settings file that will allow you to configure a whole bunch of different options about your Firefox and really just take the privacy and security to the next level. So although it's not easy to turn this off from the settings, if you kind of get your hands dirty, then you can disable all of this in the options. And once you do all that, you will get an experience more like this, which I think is much better. So you don't get any of this Pocket nonsense. You don't get a whole bunch of useless features that you don't really need. You have very sensible default configuration options here for privacy and security. And there are a few different user.js files that I would recommend. So there is the Arkenfox user.js, which is probably the most popular, and it disables a lot of the telemetry that Mozilla has in Firefox. And it's going to make it much more private. But I don't even like this one that much, to be honest, because it doesn't disable a lot of the annoyances I have about Firefox, like the Pocket integration, and a lot of the annoying features that I don't really use. So I actually prefer to use this repository right here by Narsil. This user.js here, it's a fork of the Arkenfox project, but in my opinion, it just has some better defaults. And do note that if you do use this, you will have to make a few tweaks to it, because it does break a few things. So, for instance, in my user.js file, I turn off resist fingerprinting, which makes you more anonymous, but breaks a lot of things on the internet. I also enabled DRM. I still watch Netflix. I know, what a normie. But once you do this, you might want to enable a few other options, like it turns off Firefox Sync by default. Maybe you want that. And maybe you want a few other options. You probably want to go into the settings and enable update add-ons automatically. You probably don't want to have to manually update these. And you'll probably want to disable deleting cookies and site data whenever Firefox is closed. You'll probably want to keep the history, not clear the history every time. But it does come with very privacy-respecting defaults. But it's probably a little bit too much for most people. You probably care about convenience too. So those are just a few things that you probably need to change. But after you do that, then Firefox becomes a really great and usable browser. One more thing I just wanted to add. If you want a user.js file that doesn't break everything, I would use BetterFox right here. I'll leave a link in the description as well. But this enables a bunch of privacy and security features and disables a lot of the Firefox annoyances, but without enabling some of the more advanced options that may break a lot of things about your browser or the internet. So if you're more of a normal person that cares about privacy, but not that much to the point where it breaks a lot of things, I would use this. I'll probably do another video on this in the future, going into more detail about how to set up this user.js on Firefox. But before you do this with Firefox, I think that it's a really bad experience. And after that, I think that it's one of the best browsers out there. So that's why I'm putting Hardened Firefox into base tier. Once you remove all of the Mozilla cruft, I think it's one of the best browsers out there. And it's actually what I personally use for my daily driver. So it does require a little bit of manual configuration, but once you do that, then it's pretty easy to use. And they are just so different that I didn't feel right just putting it on one tier or the other, because the difference is very big in my opinion. Next, let's talk about Epiphany or GNOME Web. I'm putting this straight in mediocre tier. And the only reason I even have this on the tier list, I don't think that many people actually use this, but there was a Linux experiment video, I think a year or two ago, where he was saying, I'm quitting Firefox and I'm moving to GNOME Web instead. And of course, a month after he released that video, he said, I used it for a month and it was terrible. Everything was breaking all the time. Websites were not displaying correctly. It was super slow and laggy. And this is the exact experience that I've had using this. So I used this before whenever I was on GNOME, and the experience was just really bad. Even now, I downloaded it again for this video, and some websites just wouldn't even work. I tried to load YouTube, and it would just get completely stuck and crash the browser. And every single movement in this browser feels like it's coated with molasses. With all due respect to the GNOME team, I don't really think that this is a browser ready for prime time. I don't think it is a great browser to use, and I don't recommend anybody to use it. I guess the nicest thing that I could say about it is that the UI is kind of nice. If you like GNOME's UI, which I do have a soft spot in my heart for, then you might appreciate that, but that is really the only thing that it has going for it. And I don't recommend anybody to use that. And next up, let's go over Google Chrome. You know where this is going. It's going straight in the spyware tier. If you're using Google Chrome, just stop, because what Google is doing with this is it's just collecting all of your data on every website you visit. It could be collecting so much more information than that. We don't even know because it's closed source and you can't actually see the source code. So it could be doing all kinds of nefarious things in the background. Google is generally an evil company that you shouldn't trust. Don't worry, it used to be me. I used to use Google Chrome a few years ago before I started using Linux. Because, oh, it's so cool, you can sync your Google account, so when you get a new computer, wow, all your settings are right there. You can do all that with Firefox and a lot of other browsers. And even if you like Chromium, there are much better Chromium-based browsers out there. Brave is one of them. If you want something like Google Chromium, but without all the creepiness of Google tracking your whereabouts all over the internet. No thanks. So, next, let's talk about IceCat. IceCat is another Firefox clone, but with a few differences. So IceCat is what you want to use if you are a free software extremist. And of course, I'm not talking about software that is $0. I'm talking about free as in freedom. And if you know anything about free software, this generally means software that is open source, that you can view the source code just to see that it's not doing anything malicious with the code it's executing on your machine. And so this was made by free software purists. And a problem that they have with the open web, well, you can just read it here if you want to. This is an article by Richard Stallman. Of course, it's by Richard Stallman about non-free JavaScript. And so JavaScript is used everywhere on the internet. It is used for any kind of scripting. And most JavaScript that you're going to run from the internet is going to be non-free. It's not going to be open source. You can't go in and inspect the source code and see what it's doing to you. So if you log on to google.com, you're not really sure what information they're collecting about you. And that is the problem that Richard Stallman outlines here. He doesn't want to use any non-free software or code on his machine at all, including JavaScript. So what this web browser does is it includes a whole bunch of extensions, most notably Libre.js, which block any non-free JavaScript on your computer. So obviously, as you can expect, this is going to break a lot of websites because tons of websites, especially websites that are more like web applications, they use a ton of JavaScript in the background, and they're just going to completely break a whole lot of websites that you use all the time. Like, we can just see this if you go to reddit.com or youtube.com. Like, most of the website is just not going to work, half of it's not going to load. And they do kind of have some workarounds for this. So if you go to something like youtube.com, you'll see that you're actually not going to YouTube. You're going to Invidious, which is a privacy-respecting YouTube front end, and you can still watch all of your favorite YouTubers on here. Let's watch Mental Outlaw. And this is going to work fine because it is using free JavaScript. But of course, normal YouTube, which collects a whole bunch of data about you, is not going to work half of the time. And same with some websites like Reddit or Twitter. If you try to go there, then it'll automatically redirect you to a privacy respecting alternative, or not even alternative. This is just a different front end, so you can still browse your favorite subreddits, I guess. So you might like that as a workaround. And probably for some other websites, they would work fine if they're pretty simple. But some other websites, you might just have to add to the whitelist here. And you probably will be adding a lot to the whitelist. So I would only pick IceCat if you really care about this whole Libre.js thing. And if you don't really care about it and you're just going to whitelist most of the websites that you visit on a day-to-day basis, it's not really worth it to use. So it's not bad, but I don't really see the point in it. I'm not really going to use Libre.js. You might be interested in that, but not me. So that's why I'm going to rank it in just the decent tier. I think it's okay. If you're truly in love with the vision that they have with this web browser, then go ahead. But even some of the decisions are a little bit questionable here. Like, they have an entire extension about calculating US postage because the United States Postal Service, their website, does not work if you're only using free JavaScript. And so this is a workaround, but how often are you calculating postage in the United States? I don't even live in the United States, so why do I have this? Why couldn't this just be optional? I don't know. It's kind of baffling, but it is kind of funny, I guess. And there are a few other extensions here that are mostly just more workarounds for Libre.js. So this is a workaround for libgen.me. If you even use this website, this fixes maybe some issues with circs if you even use that website. So again, I probably wouldn't use this, but you can check it out. Next up is LibreWolf. So LibreWolf, when I pull it up here, it might kind of look familiar because it kind of looks like Hardened Firefox. So it's Firefox without all of the bloat that Mozilla adds to it. And that's basically what it is. So if we look around here, it's basically Firefox without Pocket and a bunch of Mozilla telemetry. And it just has much better privacy configurations by default. There's no Google Analytics in the settings page. And it is going to be very private and secure by default. Now, the same thing with Hardened Firefox. It is probably going to be a little bit too restrictive. And so you probably want to enable some things. Like, you probably don't want to delete cookies and site data whenever LibreWolf is closed. You probably want to retain your logins. Most normal people, I think, would want to do that. You probably want to remember your history. And there are a few other privacy settings, but they have this little LibreWolf section right here where you can kind of customize the more advanced privacy settings. So some people may want this enable resist fingerprinting, which does increase your privacy. But like I said, it breaks the web, so you can uncheck this if you want. And you don't have to go through some weird settings page like you would in Firefox. So in Firefox, you either have to install some user.js file, which maybe some normal people wouldn't know how to do that, or you have to go through this weird, scary menu where you have to go through a bunch of random settings right here in order to actually customize this stuff. And it's probably not something most people are going to do. So I really like the fact that they have this menu right here, and you can go through and just see if you want these options or not. So it disables Firefox Sync by default, but that is something that a lot of people might like, so you can just easily enable that. You have to restart LibreWolf, but that's fine. You can update add-ons automatically, which is something that most people probably want. If you're super privacy focused, you may not want this. But that's why I like LibreWolf, because it gives you the option if you're just a normal person and if you want to configure this. So I would highly recommend this browser. Look at this. It even comes with uBlock Origin by default. I mean, could it get any better? uBlock Origin is probably the only extension that a lot of you people need. Doesn't come included with Firefox, but it does with LibreWolf. Another nice touch. Thanks, LibreWolf. But one of the only things that a lot of people don't like about LibreWolf is that it updates behind Firefox. So this is a Firefox fork. And so if Firefox updates, then they have to update LibreWolf after that. And so you may be a day or two behind on security updates because LibreWolf is generally pretty fast. Whenever Firefox releases a new release, then LibreWolf is usually right behind, maybe a day or two or three. So if you really care about getting the absolute latest in security, then that might be an issue for you. but probably for most people, being a day or two behind vanilla Firefox is not going to be a big deal. And I highly recommend you use LibreWolf. It is a very good browser, and I would say right behind Hardened Firefox, because it's almost the same thing. It's just a little bit easier. You don't have to dig into the user.js file yourself. So I don't know if I would recommend it for normal people, because they probably don't care about their privacy that much. But if you want a very privacy respecting browser that doesn't take too much to set up, I would definitely recommend LibreWolf. Next up, let's go over Microsoft Edge. Of course, you know where this is going to end up. It's going to go in Spyware tier. This is basically just the same thing as Google Chrome, except instead of sending all of your information to Google, it sends it all to Microsoft, which is not any better. I don't want any evil corporation harvesting all of my personal data. Of course, it's closed source also, so I highly recommend you not use this browser. And you know what? Let's take Opera right here and put it in the same tier. I'm sorry, Opera fans, but Opera is also closed source, so they do claim to care about privacy a little bit, but the browser is closed source, so you can't really see if they're collecting which and what data about you. And if you start up Opera, it does make a whole bunch of unsolicited requests to Opera. What data is it sending to Opera? I don't really know. And some people really dislike this browser because, oh no, it was bought by an evil Chinese company. Not a Chinese company, anything but that. As if sending your data to Americans is so much better than sending it to Chinese. I don't want my data being sent anywhere, so I'm just not going to use any of these browsers. I don't recommend Opera. I don't even recommend their gaming browser. You've probably seen this in some YouTube ads or something. They do have a gaming browser, and no, I don't recommend it. You can be a pro gamer and use something like Hardened Firefox. Next up, let's go to Pale Moon. So Pale Moon is yet another Firefox clone with a twist. Let's pop it open right here, and right away you might begin a blast from the past. What is this UI? So this is actually a fork of the old UI of Firefox. So if you were using Firefox like, I don't know, 5 or 10 years ago, it's about from that era, and you really like the old style of Firefox, back when it was so customizable and you can do all these different things, I don't know, a lot of people just have this nostalgia for old Firefox. I just don't see it. I actually like the modern Firefox UI, and you can still customize it if you don't like it for whatever reason. I just don't understand these people who go on Reddit and complain every time Firefox adjusts a few pixels of the address bar. There's always some angry people who are saying they're going to quit using Firefox immediately anytime their design changes. But enough of this rant. I mean, Pale Moon is fine, so it's basically an old version of Firefox. But of course it's still maintained, so it's not going to be like a security nightmare. They do have some weird questionable designs like this really stupid homepage right here. If you look under the hood, it's making a bunch of requests to Google, and it has a bunch of useless websites on here that you would never use in a million years. Why would you ever shop at the Home Depot online? I don't know. There's an ad right here telling you to become a pro for only $20 a year. By the way, there's a million other start pages like this. You don't need to pay $20 a year for this. And I'm sure this is some deal they worked out with them to get some money. I mean, if you really want to sell out, you can. Donate link is in the description, just so you guys know. But of course, you can disable this, and it's going to have some privacy respecting options. You can go into the settings. This is the old style of doing it. I don't know, I think it's okay. A lot of people still like it. But I don't really see a whole lot of reason to use this if you're not really into the UI like me. This UI is just doing nothing for me. But I don't know, if it reawakens some deep nostalgia deep within your soul, then I guess you can check this out. The extensions are just okay too. You're not going to be getting modern Firefox extensions. There is still like an extension repository with some ad blocking plugins and things like that. You can even click here on the homepage. Wow, I guess it is useful for something. And you can go to extensions here. There's some privacy and security, and you can download some ad block or something like that. I'm sure this works fine. I just don't really see the point in using this. There are much better options out there, so I'm just going to put this one in decent tier. Next up is Qutebrowser, another very beloved browser. And this browser is very different than a lot of browsers I've talked about. It is not just another Firefox clone. Here is the browser. You might be thinking, where is everything? Where's the address bar? Where's the back button? This is a keyboard-centric browser. So if you are one of those weirdos who uses Vim and you have tiling window manager and you only use the keyboard and you never touch the mouse for anything, then you are going to love this browser probably. It is basically the Vim version of a browser. So if I want to open up a website, I can just run O to open, and I can go to some website right here, and voila, now I am there. I can open a new tab with capital O. All of your favorite Vim bindings are here. So if I go to, I don't know, old.reddit.com, you can go to Reddit, you can go up and down with the J and K keys. You can scroll down with Control D, Control U. You can jump around to different links with F. Now a bunch of characters have appeared on screen. And we can navigate to some dumb political discussion on Reddit by typing in the characters next to the link. And now we are there. And I did all of that without even touching my mouse. That is pretty cool. And so if you know the Vim keys, then you can navigate basically the entire web without using your mouse at all. That can make it very appealing for power users. If you want to learn all of the key bindings, you can just run help. This will show you all of the key bindings. And of course, this is all configurable. This is a very configurable browser. And it doesn't even have a settings page. What it has is a text file. So if you use a tiling window manager and you're used to opening up your .config files, then it's going to have a file in there where you can configure it in Python. That is the language this browser is written in. And so it gives you a very cool experience that is very different from almost every other browser. But with how cool I think this browser is, there are a few issues. First off, it does have ad blocker support out of the box, but the ad blocking that it has is not very advanced. And so across some websites, you'll run into some issues where it doesn't completely block it. Or on some websites like YouTube or some video websites, the ad will just not be blocked at all. So if I was to go to YouTube and if I was to click on something, then it would just play ads like normal. This is a big issue that people have had in this browser for a long time. That's because it's not using uBlock origin or anything like that under the hood. It's basically just a host file. And so you can't really get any super in-depth ad blocking with this, or tracker blocking, which is something you might be worried about as well. So it's going to do a worse job at tracker blocking as well than something like uBlock origin. And the best fix that people have come up with to get around the YouTube issue is just to play the ad really fast and automatically click on the skip ad button, which I guess works, but it's probably not what most people want. And there are some other cool features that you can use as a workaround. Like if you want, you can even open videos in MPV in your native video player that you have on your system. You can do that. That's because the scripting capabilities with Python that you can use here, it goes pretty deep, and you can do a lot with this browser that you couldn't with others. So I don't actually use this browser much, so I can't show you video clips of all that. But I'm sure if you check out any other video on Qutebrowser, you'll see all these features, and it might be worth it to you. But that's not all that's wrong with Qutebrowser. In my experience, at least, it's going to be a little bit slower than Firefox or Chromium. Unfortunately, especially if you have a lower end PC, that is going to be something you have to deal with. It's going to be a little bit slower to use. It's definitely not a bad browser by any means. And I think this niche of a keyboard-based browser is not really seen anywhere else. I know you can install like the Vim plugin in Firefox or Chromium, but it's just not the same. So I definitely respect anybody who uses this, but in my opinion, there's just a few too many little small things that just annoy me with this browser for me to use it full time. So I'm putting this in decent tier. I think it's okay. Next up is Ungoogled Chromium. I really like this browser. I'm putting it straight in the excellent tier. I used this for a long time actually, probably almost a year. I made a whole video on this browser. I really fell in love with it. And let me just show you it right here. So it is basically Google Chrome without all of the Google. And even just the base Chromium, it comes with a whole bunch of callbacks to Google anyway. So Ungoogled Chromium just strips everything out of the browser that could possibly send any molecule of data to Google. And I really like it for that. And the design here is really simple. If you've ever used Google Chrome, it's probably what you would expect, but it has a very minimal user interface. There's not that many options compared to something like Firefox, but it isn't that customizable. So if you don't really like Google's design decisions, Ungoogled Chromium adds a few flags and options that you can kind of use to override Google's design decisions. But at the end of the day, you kind of have to follow their idea for what the browser should be. So even though you don't have any Google spookiness inside here, it is still basically Google Chrome. love it or hate it. So do keep that in mind. And another annoying thing about this that is preventing me from putting it in the top tier is that these add-ons by default, since you have to get them from the Google Chrome store and this Ungoogled Chromium doesn't want to talk to Google at all, you have to kind of manually install these plugins, or you can use this plugin right here to manage your plugin. I know browser extension to manage your browser extensions. That's a little bit weird, but you can update your plugins like this. So you just have to manually do this, and every time there's an update, you have to click through here and manually update all of these. It's a little bit annoying, but it is the workaround that you have to use in order to get around the Google store. So it's not a big deal, especially if you're like me and you don't use that many extensions. You can still go to the Google Chrome store and install an extension like you normally would, but the way of updating this is a little bit weird. I did a whole video on this if you want to check it out. I definitely think it's worth your time, but just keep in mind that it has a few limitations like this. Okay, it's time for another controversial one. Vivaldi. I know a lot of people really love this browser. It has one of the most rabid fan bases on the internet. I don't know why, but it does. Well, actually, I can kind of see why. Let's open up Vivaldi right here. And Vivaldi is pretty unique in that it does what basically no other web browser can do. It just has a ton of crazy features that you would never expect a web browser to have, essentially. It has page tiling. We have to open up a couple of tabs and then click this. We can tile these vertically or horizontally. So now we have one window, but we have two different pages right here. That is kind of cool, I guess. It has a take a break option. If you're addicted to the internet and you need to take a break for a while, it can automatically time you out if that's something you want. It has a panel of a whole bunch of things you can do. You can put some shortcuts on here like Mastodon. You can access your history and your bookmarks from all of this, your reading list, your notes, different windows. It really has the kitchen sink here. You can add more here, like your favorite websites. It even has a clock here if your system clock isn't enough. Basically, what Vivaldi tries to do is it tries to be like an operating system posing as a web browser. You can just do so much with this. It also blocks ads and trackers by default, which is pretty good. I haven't explored this too extensively, but from what I can tell, it does a pretty good job. It has all these useless websites by default, which is kind of lame, but it's not a big deal. It has Bing by default as a search engine, which again isn't that great, but you can easily change that, I guess. You have this giant settings panel if you want this, and Vivaldi really has so much. It has even a mail client in here. It has a calendar here. It even has RSS reader in here. So you can really just make this browser your everything. I guess once you use this browser, you'll never use another app on your computer. That's kind of the idea of it. For me, this is just way too maximalist. I don't need 90% of these features, but I guess some power users might enjoy this. So I definitely understand why a lot of people like this browser. But let's talk about privacy and security. So Vivaldi claims to be very privacy respecting, and they have all these settings in here to help protect your privacy. They block trackers and ads, as I've said, by default. So that sounds pretty good. But probably the biggest drawback of Vivaldi is it is not open source. Now, you may have heard that Vivaldi is open source, and that's partly true. So Vivaldi is partly open source. So they released the modifications that they made to Chromium. So they're using Chromium under the hood to render the pages. But the UI, all of this right here, is closed source. You have no access to that. And of course, they have good reasons as to why they don't open source it. They have this long sob story on their website explaining how they don't want someone to fork them and just copy all of their work and become more popular than them. That's one of their main reasons for not open sourcing it. But unfortunately, I just can't bring myself to completely trust a browser that is closed source. I know only the UI is closed source, but that is one of the most important parts of the browser, the part that you directly interact with. And so I know they claim to be all about privacy, but when it's closed source, I can't really see what data they're collecting about me, and I have to just trust them. I don't want to just trust them. I'm sorry, Vivaldi. I'm sure that the people who developed this, I'm sure their hearts are in the right place, but I just can't really give it a higher grade than this, because at least for me, the closed source is a big deal breaker. And of course, this is going to be a much better choice than something like Google Chrome. You're not sending all of your data to an evil company. but I'm just going to put this in mediocre tier. If it was open source, it would probably be higher, but I guess I'm just a little bit of a free software zealot. So if you're a giant Vivaldi fan, please don't leave a dislike on this video. It's just my opinion, guys. But finally, let's go into our last one, Waterfox. What is Waterfox? Waterfox is yet another Firefox clone, and it's actually pretty good. Let's just put this on excellent tier right here. So this is Waterfox. Like I said, it is a Firefox clone, and it has some pretty good defaults out of the box. So it doesn't come with all the cruft that Mozilla Firefox has. That's one of the reasons why I don't like Firefox. But this is a lot more bare bones. It doesn't have all the crazy features that Firefox does. It does have a few. So it has Firefox Sync. If you really like Firefox Sync capabilities, then you can sign in, sync your Mozilla account, and get all of your settings from Firefox. It has some pretty good privacy-respecting defaults. It's not perfect, but it's probably going to be enough for most people. It's definitely better than Firefox's defaults, because it does turn off a lot of Firefox telemetry. It's not really that much of a privacy browser. They claim to be more about speed than anything. So probably a lot of the telemetry that they're disabling is just to make the browser run faster, which either way, I guess it works out. It's fine. And by default, the search is Bing, which is not great, but you can pretty easily change it to start page or something else. And that's basically all I have to show you about Waterfox. It is not that much different from Firefox. It's just Firefox with a different coat of paint and a little bit different defaults. But between Waterfox and Firefox, you're not going to see a big difference. But I do have to talk about one of the things that a lot of people really dislike about Waterfox, and that is that it is owned by an advertising company. Oh no! So here's the company that actually owns this, and coincidentally, it is the same company that bought out Startpage a few years ago, which is another privacy-respecting search engine. And would you look at that, right on the homepage, they're connecting people with advertisers at scale. So now you just know that the entire browser is compromised, right? Well, we do have to keep in mind that it is still open source. So you can still go into the source code and you can make sure that this company is not phoning a whole bunch of data back to them. That is probably going to be your main concern. They're going to harvest all your data and send it to advertisers, but they haven't done that, and you can go through the source code and verify that. They haven't really done anything too creepy with it. And so when this news first broke, it was a huge deal. Everybody was making a big deal about this. But this was a couple of years ago, and not really much has changed at all. So I don't really see the big problem with using this. I definitely understand if you might be turned off by it being run by an advertising company, but I just don't think it's as big of a deal as everybody seems to think it is. But I'm kind of leaving this one up to you. You can take it or leave it. I think it's pretty good. But you're not really going to get that much more out of this browser than you would with just properly configured Firefox. But I guess this is good if you're kind of lazy and you don't want to remove the pocket and all of the annoying Firefox features. It could be something to check out. So that is it. That is my browser tier list. Hopefully this gave you a good idea of which browser that you should personally use. I think that any of these in the top 2 rows you can't really go wrong with. And you can even get by with using some of these. These are pretty good, they're just not my personal favorite. So do I think that any of these are the perfect browser and I will use them for the rest of time? Obviously not. But for the time being, I am pretty happy with Hardened Firefox. And with the right user.js file, it doesn't really require that much configuration to set up. So I guess if you want a recommendation after this video is finished as to what you should do, that's my recommendation. And if you want a browser that's easy enough for your grandma to pick up, I would pick Brave because it has ad blocking out of the box. And you don't have to tweak a bunch of settings to get it working for normal people. Maybe just disable the crypto, or maybe your grandma is going to start asking you, is this the Bitcoin that I've been hearing so much about? But let me know in the comments if I'm completely off base. And of course, feel free to have your own browser wars in the comments. But this is just my opinion. Hopefully it helped some of you maybe pick a browser. And to just stop using Google Chrome. Just don't do it. There's so many better options out there.